The voice must be followed by truth-telling, because until we acknowledge the reality of our history, we are shackled to its demons. And truth must be followed by a Makarrata Commission. Makarrata is about conflict resolution, justice and, crucially, self-determination. It's a path to national treaty that acknowledges the pre-existing rights of people in a land where sovereignty was never ceded, that acknowledges that we are on what is Aboriginal land, always was, always will be.
In the Uluru Statement of the Heart, which the Prime Minister agreed on the first night he was elected that he would implement, they talk about a treaty and they talk about financial settlement. Is that the case? Because when you create a void, it is filled by information. That is what the opposition is doing in this case. They're saying we don't have the we don't have the information, and they're the ones filling it. And at this stage, they're winning here.
Yeah, they're winning because they're using the same old scare campaign that they've used every time there's been a change. So during the national apology, when Peter Dutton walked out, he said Australia would be up for billions of dollars of compensation after the apology. Never happened. After the Mabo and Wick decisions, native title, billions of dollars compensation,
But isn't it mentioned in the Uluru Statement
happened.
of the Heart, Tanya? It's actually written in there, isn't it? So will there be a financial settlement as part of a percentage of GDP? That's actually talked about, isn't it? And a treaty.
Well, Matt, we're not determining any of that right now. We're determining one simple question. Do we change our constitution to recognise Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people? And do we set up a committee that would give advice? I don't know.
Sitting in the backseat, gotta make my mind up. Which seat can I take? It's Friday, gotta get down on Friday. Everybody's looking forward to the weekend. Friday, getting down on Friday. Everybody's looking forward to the weekend. Partying, looking forward to the weekend. Yesterday was Thursday, today it's Friday. We so excited, we gonna have a ball today. Tomorrow is Saturday and Sunday comes afterwards. I don't want this weekend to end.
R&B, Rebecca Black, so chillin' in the front side, in the backseat, I'm driving, cruising fast.
Australia has said he will deliver the Uluru Statement of the Heart in full. And that includes a treaty. So you've got to either believe the Prime Minister or not. And if you want to clear up, scare pain.
Australian Labor Party, I commit to the Uluru Statement from the Heart in full.
But anyway, let me just focus on the important thing. Surely, as part of the Uluru Statement, we have a voice, we have treaty, we have truth-telling. As part of a treaty, won't there be compensation? If there is, I mean, that's not totally unexpected.
This isn't about a treaty, Ben.
But there are three parts of the Uluru Statement.
Yeah, and this is
so
not...
you're talking about the voice.
This is not about a treaty.
But as part of treaty, which we guess will be a following step...
This is not about a treaty.
Do you foresee that compensation would be paid?
This is not about a treaty. This isn't about that. The voice is just the means to the end. The voice is just the means to the end.
It's Friday, gotta get down on Friday. Everybody's looking forward to the weekend.
Australian Labor Party, I commit to the Uluru Statement from the Heart in full. The voice must be followed by truth-telling, because until we acknowledge the reality of our history, we are shackled to its demons. And truth must be followed by a Makarrata Commission. Makarrata is about conflict resolution, justice and, crucially, self-determination. It's a path to national treaty that acknowledges the pre-existing rights of people in a land where sovereignty was never ceded, that acknowledges that we are on what is Aboriginal land, always was, always will be.
Ministers seemingly flip-flopping, backflipping on whether or not the party supports a treaty.
Yeah, it's very difficult to lead in the face of negative polls, and the Prime Minister has committed 34 times to implementing the Uluru Statement from the Heart in full. That includes treaty. It also includes a percentage of GDP for repatriations, etc., etc. And so for him to now be walking away from that, and we heard this morning his backflip, shows that he's not prepared to actually stand up for what he believes in. He either believes in implementing Uluru Statement from the Heart in full, or he doesn't. And he can't seem to tell the Australian people the truth. He's bought the T-shirt, he's gone to the concert. We all know that this treaty is going to be part of the Voice process. The Voice is being set up to implement treaty into the future. So for me, as always, Shari, it's a very respectful no on the Voice to Parliament because of the unintended consequences that it will bring. And we've got a Prime Minister that cannot be straight on this issue with the Australian people.
Is important. Are you still committed to Commonwealth's negotiating treaties?
Patricia, well, where does it say that? It doesn't even say that in the Uluru Statement from the Heart. It doesn't say that. It doesn't speak about the Commonwealth negotiating treaties. It doesn't say that, Patricia. So don't get sucked into...
I'm not sucked into anything. I just want to know what your position is.
What our position is that there will be a referendum.
Yesterday, in an interview with Patricia Cavallis on Radio National, Prime Minister Anthony Albanese misled his party's support for a federal treaty with Indigenous Australians, and he continues to mislead Australians about the obvious link between his Voice and his federal treaty process. He has contradicted his own words and those of his current ministers. As Shadow Minister Linda Burney said, an Albanese Labor government will also make Makarrata treaty and truth-telling a priority. It will work with the Voice to Parliament when it is established. With respect to treaty, it would recommend a framework for federal treaty making. As Shadow Minister Mark Dreyfus said, Labor has committed to honouring that request by establishing in government as a matter of priority a Makarrata Commission. The Commission's oversight of treaty would include developing a framework for federal treaty making. As opposition leader, Anthony Albanese has said, an Albanese Labor government will establish a Makarrata Commission as a priority. It will work with the Voice to Parliament when it is established. The Makarrata Commission's treaty responsibilities will initially include recommending a framework for federal treaty making. And on the 12th of the 2nd, 2020, in the House of Representatives, Anthony Albanese also said, the Voice must be followed by truth-telling. Truth must be followed.
Please resume your seat. Senator Polley, on a point of order.
Just a reminder through you, Chair, of the correct title for the Prime Minister.
Senators are reminded to use the appropriate titles for members and senators. Senator Hanson.
The Voice must be followed by truth-telling. Truth must be followed by a Makarrata Commission. It's a path to a national treaty that acknowledges the pre-existing rights of peoples in land where sovereignty was never ceded, and acknowledges that we are on what is Aboriginal land, always will be, always was, always will be. That is not deserving of Prime Minister, and as far as I'm concerned, he's nothing but a coward and should be thrown out of this. He's a bloody liar.
Senator Hanson, resume your seat.
Well, I do think the order is important, Laura. The Uluru Statement from the Heart called for the Voice to be done first. Our commitment to the Australian people made at the May 22 election was to honour and implement the Uluru Statement from the Heart, starting, as the Voice, the Uluru Statement called for, starting with the Voice. That's what we're going to do. And of course, there are other elements in the Uluru Statement from the Heart. They include truth-telling and treaty, but they come next. They come after the Voice is put in our Constitution as constitutional recognition, long overdue, of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people.
Well, where does it say that? It doesn't even say that in the Uluru Statement from the Heart. It doesn't say that. It doesn't speak about the Commonwealth negotiating treaties. It doesn't say that, Patricia.
Fun Friday comes afterwards. I don't want this weekend to end.
RB, Rebecca Black. So chillin' in the front side, in the backseat. I'm driving, cruising fast.
Recognition.
You don't think the Commonwealth has a role to negotiate treaties?
No, I didn't say that. I said that's not in the Uluru Statement from the Heart.
Okay, so do you think the Commonwealth has a role on negotiating treaties?
Patricia, what the Commonwealth has a role in is the referendum that will put to the Australian
So let's pull up this video and I'll play it for you guys now.
When we have a constitutionally enshrined voice to Parliament.
Isn't about a treaty, Ben.
But there are three parts of the Uluru Statement.
Yeah, and this is
so
not.
You're talking about the voice.
Not about a treaty.
And we advance on the process of the Uluru Statement from the Heart, including truth and treaty.
But as part of treaty, which we guess will be a following step.
This is not about a treaty.
To find courage to begin the process of truth-telling and national treaty making.
We'll see that compensation would be
paid. This is not about a treaty.
The path to national treaty. Agreements that acknowledge the pre-existing rights of a people in a land where sovereignty was never ceded.
You're talking about the voice.
This is not about a treaty.
The national process of truth-telling, agreement and treaty making.
You're talking about the voice.
This is not about a treaty.
As a priority, Labor will establish a Makarrata Commission with responsibility for truth-telling and treaty.
You're talking about the voice.
This is not about a treaty.
And it will work with a voice to Parliament. This is how we can go forward.
You're talking about the voice.
This is not about a treaty.
And treaty making.
You're talking about the voice.
This is not about a treaty.
Truth, without which we can never be all that we can as a nation. And treaty.
You're talking about the voice.
This is not about a treaty.
A clarion call for truth, treaty and voice.
You're talking about the voice.
This is not about a treaty.
Voice, truth, treaty. Labor is committed to all three.
With the rest of the country, and to fix our health and education and justice systems and better and to empower our people economically and socially. Those questions might be better handled through a process, an ongoing commitment to a process to look at how we've gone in terms of closing the disparities and achieving the goals that we've set ourselves and so on. Whereas there are some issues like restitution and capital for our people to develop our own economy. Some of those questions might be the subject of a moment in time agreement. And of course, the interplay between an agreement at the national level and what happens at the state and territory level is also something we need to do a lot more thinking and talking about and strategizing about as a people. And so that is why, I think that that this voice process, if we continue on the Uluru pathway, we could have a voice institutionalized in in the coming few years, and we'll be in a position then to talk about agreement making.
Okay.
A new spirit of partnership between government and First Nations people through the work of Makarrata, treaty making and truth telling, and by enshrining a voice to Parliament in our Constitution. My government supports the Uluru Statement from the Heart and its call for an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice in our Constitution, which is what the coming referendum is about. The new government supports of partnership between government and First Nations people and its call through the work of Aboriginal and treaty making and truth telling, and by enshrining a voice to Parliament in our Constitution.